Welcome to the PharmaSource podcast. Nordic Life Science Days takes place this week, 13th to the 14th of October in Gothenburg, and it's the largest Nordic partnering event for the life science industry. So today we're joined by Dr. Marjo Puumalainen, International Director of SwedenBIO, and one of the key people behind this event. Marjo's role is dedicated to strengthening Sweden's international presence by fostering partnerships, investments and global collaborations. So I'm looking forward to an interesting conversation about both the importance of Sweden for biotech and NLS Days.
Thank you so much, Luke. Lovely to be here.
Before we jump in, I think it'd be nice to know a bit more about you and your career before you joined SwedenBIO.
Yeah, so I have been now with SwedenBIO for 3 years. Before that, I was in a startup company, really raising funds for a startup company. We were working on CRISPR-based antivirals in the company. So I know how it feels to be in a Stockholm-based company, looking for funds, looking for new investors, and also, of course, develop product and also run a company. And that's basically why I then decided to join SwedenBIO, because I noticed a lot of challenges in this space and trying to really take those challenges and maybe frustrations as well and try to improve conditions for our young companies in Sweden. Before that, I was in Switzerland for a long time, did my PhD there. I'm originally from Finland. It's always interesting to see from a little bit from different perspectives how life science industry works in different countries and also in different sectors. So being a long time in an academic setting to do basic research, but then being more interested in translating the academic research and how can we make a difference for patients.
Interesting. So was your first interaction then with SwedenBIO when you were that Chief Scientific Officer? Was that your first interaction?
Exactly. Then that's when I noticed that, for example, when you work with academics or when you want to do different type of collaborations, sometimes you can be quite lonely in a startup company, and then you have to figure out all the contracts, everything. How do you, for example, do a collaboration agreements? And that's when I noticed that the organization like SwedenBIO has a lot of knowledge, but also has the power of bringing small companies together and then fixing fundamental problems or challenges together. So that's how I started to get to know how SwedenBIO can work. And we had a problem, for example, with the patents. How do you deal with that in an academic collaboration? And then I realized that having this kind of community power to deal with those questions can be extremely powerful and also very helpful for the startup founders.
Maybe you could paint a picture of what Sweden's life science landscape looks like for listeners. It'd be great to get a bit of an overview about Sweden and its importance for biotech.
Yeah, so Sweden is, of course, the most maybe well-known is the innovation leader. That's really, I would say, the DNA of Sweden and actually in many of the other Nordic countries. So we keep on competing on who is on the top ranking within the Nordics. This year it was Sweden again. So we were I think it was 5th or 6th year in a row, the innovation leader within the EU.
By which metric, please?
Yeah, this is the European Innovation Board, and it was just released for the 24 Innovation Board was just released, and Sweden was the lead there. And also we just saw the Global Innovation Index coming in, and Sweden was on a second spot there. So Switzerland is always the first one, and Sweden comes the second. So this is extremely important for us showing what type of country Sweden is. So this has been ongoing for a long time. So we are good in solving problems, finding new solutions on problems. And this is, of course, really important in life science industry. So we have a very strong academic research. Karolinska Institute and many other academic research institutes are located in Sweden. And of course, giving, for example, the legacy of Nobel Prizes being handed every year from Stockholm. This gives also visibility to life science, actually, in a different way than other countries. So just very soon we can hear who are the the new Nobel laureates for this year. And in December in Stockholm, every December we celebrate the Nobel Prizes in Stockholm. So it's a nice way to also showcase to our public audience that life science really matters, and academic research also really matters in order to bring new solutions, new medicines, whatever you're working on, to people. One interesting part of Swedish life science industry is a phenomenon called teacher's exemption. This is a rule basically that academic researchers have, that they own commercialize their findings from the academic environment. So in many other countries, the university owns patent rights, but in Sweden, it's still ongoing that the researchers themselves owns the rights to commercialize it. And this really has made in Sweden a culture of finding companies. So it's very common that academic researchers, whether it's a professor or postdoc, start a company based on their findings. I see this as a very important part in the culture of starting companies, to really that the academics are thinking about this, not only publishing their research, but really thinking the step ahead. How could we commercialize this finding? And we see this in numbers of young companies. We have roughly 4,000 life science companies in Sweden. And this is a very high number, and actually, but there's a lot of them. The companies are very young ones and very small ones as well. So the landscape is a bit scattered, I would say. So that's why our organizations like SwedenBIO, who are really explaining the landscape, is quite important. But of course, Sweden has also a legacy of big players, such as AstraZeneca, and this is very important for the ecosystem to keep talent inside, but also to manufacture pharmaceuticals, because that's really where the export then comes in. So pharmaceutical manufacturing is actually the third largest export value item in Sweden. So last year it was 15 billion US dollars. So this is really important also because then the politicians listens as well. It really makes a difference what AstraZeneca's and other companies, other larger companies that are producing are doing and saying.
Yeah, it's very impressive, isn't it? When it's a country of 10 million people and you've got, as you say, 4,000 companies in life sciences, and you index so highly on those innovation indexes.
Yeah.
Why would you say that is? Why do you think Sweden punches above its weight in terms of innovation overall, but also in terms of life sciences? Is there something about the culture?
Yeah, it's of course an interesting question. What is in the ecosystem that keeps on, delivering for so many years? I would say that for the business culture, how Swedish business culture works, it's very inclusive. So, I mean, diversity, for example, it's not just something that you write in your grant application. It's really something that you live for. So that's something that we are very proud of in the Nordics in general. We have a very flat hierarchy. Can also mean that people with good ideas can say their ideas actually. I think this is actually quite important. We can dare to speak up and bring the ideas that you have. We don't have a very strong kind of CEO or leadership driven culture, but rather quite flat hierarchy. And I also think it's interesting to see that how in Sweden we emphasize quite a lot on healthy work-life balance. That's an interesting part to think about, like how do we support innovation in like working like this? Because maybe, I don't know, where do you get your best ideas? Is it when you work 10 hours behind your computer, or maybe it's something else when you go out with your family or do something, change the scenery, for example. It can be also then that the good ideas come together.
Walking through fields wearing headphones, usually for me.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah.
I get them in shower. So I think it's an interesting thing to think about, like how does, individuals' habits creates innovation as well. Of course, innovation is, I believe, is also bringing different type of talents together so that they can, exchange ideas. So this is something that we are all the time as a SwedenBIO community thinking, how can we bring different type of experts together and allow them basically to innovate? But then also, why is it interesting from international company point of view, this
Mhm.
type of Swedish culture? I think one thing that is not so great from our point of view is that we have low salaries within life science if we compare our, for example, our neighbors in Denmark. Basically, the idea here is that you have a very good work-life balance, your private life balance, but the salaries at the same time, they are not super high.
Mhm.
There's another ways of basically working around those. But from, of course, from the international point of view, that can make Sweden very attractive in terms of that you get actually talent. So we have our
Mm.
level of PhDs is very high, and people engaged in R&D is extremely high in Sweden. But still, their salaries are not very high at all. So that's something that is quite attractive. That's what we
Yeah,
see from
yeah,
international
yeah.
company point of view.
Those points you mentioned around culture, they're really interesting around like diversity, psychological safety, work-life balance, which isn't necessarily the most popular things
Yeah.
around the Western world, let's say at the moment. I mean, are you seeing any impacts perhaps on all of the geopolitical upheaval that's happening at the moment? Are you seeing there being more scientists, more executives who are relocating towards Sweden and to the Nordics in general?
Yeah, I think it's a bit too early to say at the moment, like where is this gonna go, to be
Mm,
honest. Uh, I mean, of course, the cutting of the academic funding in the US, I think that we already see a little bit in Europe, that there's more interest from the academic researchers to come to Europe, and most likely it's the culture, like what's happening in the culture right now in the US, but also just practically because of the cuts in the funds happening there. At the same time, it's also still a bit of question mark. How does the tariffs, for example, will affect our companies?
mm,
Because it might also be that some companies need to relocate in the US, for example, the manufacturing companies, others. So I think it's a bit too early to say what's going to happen to the talent in terms of, overall. But I think that there will be some people are like very much looking into how this going to affect exactly their company. I think it's not going to be, global that all companies or academics will
yeah.
be affected the same way, but it really everyone has to kind of do the homework. What's the business? How is it affected by the latest changes
Mhm.
in the US, but also everywhere else? There's so many things happening in the
Yeah,
world.
yeah, yeah, of course, of course.
Mm.
In the UK, what we're seeing at the moment, of course, is that lots of the same types of companies you mentioned, the AstraZenecas and the
Yeah,
Mercks and companies like that are pausing or stopping investment in the UK
yeah,
and new facilities and focusing on the US. There's obviously other things going on with that as
yeah,
well, drug pricing as part
yeah,
of that.
exactly. Mm.
But it'd be good to know about Sweden Bio's role in this ecosystem. So how you go about supporting companies. Obviously, you go from the one-person startups on one side to those major Thermo Fishers and AstraZeneca who you've mentioned. How does Sweden Bio cover all of that and provide a service to your members?
Yeah, I think the speciality of SwedenBIO is actually that all of them are within the community. And I think that's one of our strengths, that we really bring together the one-man startups, we bring the large ones, and also, for example, investors and everyone who are needed basically in life science industry. So how do we work with different type of members? Yeah, it really depends basically on their need. I would say that usually the very small ones maybe need, for example, network is extremely important. This is something that I learned as being in a startup myself, that knowing the investors is very important. Trust is a very high, big thing in our industry and in every industry actually. So I think the getting to know the community type of thing is super important for the young companies or maybe smaller companies. Then, when they start to grow, we do a lot of international activities. So we, for example, take delegations. We just came back from Singapore. We do many type of delegations together. So basically, we are a bit stronger together. It's a still,
Hmm.
when you're a small company, you can be quite lonely at, I don't know, JPM or wherever you decide to go and look for partners. So it's good to have your peers with you, so that we can increase the Sweden visibility as well together. Then, of course, when you are really the bigger players like AstraZeneca's or others, then it really matters also what's the conditions to run life science company in Sweden. So I would say that there we do much more advocacy work together with our a bit bigger players. So for example, this at the moment we're working with the R&D tax incentives in Sweden. How can we improve that situation in Sweden? So many type of questions where it's better to be not a single company that is kind of trying to improve the situation, but really to bring the whole industry together and then see what can we do, what can we do for life science industry.
It'd be interesting to know about some of the practical considerations of doing business in Sweden. So you mentioned salaries earlier, the fact that they're lower if you compare to Denmark, say, the R&D tax. What do people need to know about business and regulatory environment for life sciences?
I mean, Sweden is a very stable country. I think that is stability is good for business. I think that's one important part, especially at the moment. So both our economy, but also our political systems are very, very stable. So that's something that you can really trust on what's happening here. So that's a good thing for business. Then, for example, our energy prices. So if you're thinking a bit bigger factories and stuff like that, energy prices are very low in Sweden. We also have a lot of space still available, not the case in every life science country. For example, Switzerland or UK, I think we have still much more forest left here. So that's one benefit, of course. Then also Sweden is, I mean, life science industry, there's quite a lot of regulations around sustainability. So that's also that we are very far ahead, especially when it comes to how we have a sustainable energy sources. That's something that AstraZeneca has been, I would say, leading the way, actually. How healthcare and life science industry can work towards a more sustainable way of doing business.
What are those energy sources? Is it hydropower, for example, wind, solar?
Yes, exactly. It is a lot of wind and also some solar. I think it's 98% is sustainable
Wow.
from the sustainable sources. And this is really important, for example, for Pfizer and AstraZeneca.
Yeah.
And that's also something that, for example, in the SwedenBIO community, we do a lot of knowledge sharing as well. So this is one thing that we see that the manufacturing companies are basically now learning how AstraZeneca has been thinking, because it's also now what they're doing is that all the suppliers for them need to fulfill certain sustainability criterias. So this is also coming now more and more, so that you can be more competitive by that you have already done a lot of work in the sustainability.
Plugging into a more sustainable energy grid is one of the quickest ways to improve your footprint.
Exactly. Yeah.
Let's talk about financing and the funding environment, because it's always a struggle for you mentioned your own challenges in a past life. How is SwedenBIO and Sweden overall trying to address these funding gaps for early stage companies?
Yeah, I think this is still not only in Sweden, but most likely in many other places as well. One of the trickiest part, of course, is the financing. I mean, biotech takes long time, and it takes very long time to get your money back. So as the development and R&D it's a heavy burden there. And of course, with our very high number of young companies being founded from academic environment, this is a big challenge. So what we are really looking forward, I mean, our neighbor Denmark has done quite interesting work with BII, Bioinnovation Institute, for example. So that's something, for example, a model that we're right now looking into. How could we get a similar, because they have a Novo Nordisk Foundation they're backing up their startup companies. This is something that we are also looking into in Sweden. How can we make the conditions a little bit easier for the early companies? Because it's a pity that they need to basically change their direction of the company based on the funding sources, because it's a bit of a desperation there that you go wherever you can instead of following where your actual expertise lies in. And this goes not only for funding, but also, I mean, in biotech, you need a lab space, you need quite a lot of facilities, for example, and we have all of that in the academic setting. But we're working now a lot on how can we as industry players then access very nice academic facilities. So this is a big project ongoing now in Sweden. Of course, I mean, we have in Sweden, the good news is that we have quite a lot of venture capitalists, some also specific in life science. So our largest one is called HealthCap, and they have been around for a long time. So it's really important to have these lead investors who are really dedicated to invest in life science, and they know the life science field, because otherwise the generalists, it's quite hard with them. And also we need to keep on working on there as well, educating more investors how does biotech works actually. So this is something, I mean, we in Sweden, we have a lot of tech investors. So that's something that we are also all the time working on. How can we get some of them to at least look and evaluate biotech companies?
On that point, what response do you usually get from tech investors? Because presumably the horizons, the metrics they'd be looking at would be quite different if you're
Yeah.
evaluating a software platform to a biotech, which
Yeah.
may or may not get approval many years down the line.
Yeah.
What's your experience been of that education process?
Yeah, it's a definitely a challenge, and it really need because the whole basically how the exit happens for biotechs, it's quite different than in the tech. So
Hmm.
you really need to educate from the start that how does for example, a licensing deal is an exit strategy for most of the biotech companies. So that's something that we need to keep on educating our tech investors, for example, and also, of course, the time horizon and also the amount of investments that biotechs actually need is it's much higher in that. But at the same time, then of course the return on investment can be then much higher then
Hmm.
down the line. So that's what we need to keep on talking about. And also, of course, for example, our philanthropic investors, they are very interested in life science. But I think there as well, we need to become better in explaining that it is life science industry that is making, for example, new treatments possible for patients.
How does the Nordic model work when you're talking about Sweden, Denmark, and Norway collaborating rather than competing? What's that like when you all get around a table?
Yeah, I mean, Nordic countries know, we all are aware that we are very small countries. And luckily, we share quite a lot of similarities in terms of working culture, for example. So I think that puts us on a same boat.
Mhm.
And most of us realizes that especially when going outside of Europe, when doing business outside of Europe, it's much stronger to be Nordic than separate countries on their own. So that's something that we work a
Mm.
lot. We work when we go, for example, especially the US, we go under Nordics rather than going as Sweden. Now, how does it work back home? Of course, we have quite a big differences in the life science industry, the sizes of life science industries. So Denmark and Sweden are by far the biggest players, while the others have more emerging industries
Mhm.
in their countries. But still, I mean, for example, I think Medicon Valley is a good example of a Nordic way of working. So it's an area where Sweden, the southern Sweden and Copenhagen region are really working together and
Mhm.
to make it into a cluster where yeah, leading life science cluster in Europe. And I think that's one of the most successful examples to do a cross-border collaboration within Nordic countries.
Well, let's talk then about Nordic Life Science Days. Coming up very soon in Gothenburg. I've never had the pleasure of going to Gothenburg myself. Tell us about the event and what makes it different, please.
Yes, so NLS Days, we've been running NLS Days now for 13 years, and it has been growing this whole time, which of course tells that there's interest in the Nordics. And that's the most important thing, that we really can see that a lot of people are actually interested to see what's happening in the Nordics. I think
Mm.
we as a Nordic are not the best in the sales, selling ourselves. We're a bit shy, too shy on showing what we actually have. And that's why we at SwedenBIO think it's important that we have a one venue or platform to really showcase what's happening in the Nordic life science industry. And that's why we run this event on a yearly basis in different cities in order to showcase also what's special in that city. How is the ecosystem looking in that city? So now this year we are first time in Gothenburg. And Gothenburg is the home of, for example, AstraZeneca's very big R&D site. That we will have the pleasure to visit as well during the side events right after the event for our international guests. We also Gothenburg is also home of, for example, Thermo Fisher has just invested heavily there. There's a big science park called GoGo. There's AstraZeneca's venture building park called BioVenture Hub, and many others, of course, universities, hospitals, the whole ecosystem is basically there as well. So that's the reasons why we're going this year, to showcase what's happening in Gothenburg. But at the same time, it's very much to showcase what's happening in the Nordics as well. So the event attracts 40% of our guests are from outside of the Nordics. It's focused on, we put a lot of focus on investors, given that we have so many young companies that needs more financing. So, for example, the day before the conference, we have an investor dinner where the Nordic investors can meet international investors. I think that's really important so that we get more syndications ongoing. And then every year we choose few topics where we really want to showcase what's happening in the Nordics, but that we know that it's really a high interest, of course, on the international arena as well. And life science industry is all about, I mean, it's a global industry, of course. So that's why also many of the pharmas will be there so that they will also see what's happening in the Nordics.
Thank you. Finally, Marjo, what's your advice for any listeners who might be considering working in Sweden for partnerships or for operations? Any advice you could share about how to get started?
Well, of course, first thing would be to visit Nordic Life Science Days. That's a nice way to get to meet a lot of people. I think we're still so small event that actually we managed to do a lot of customized introductions. So depending on who you want to meet in Swedish or Nordic life science industry, that's a nice place to do that in a very relaxed environment. Then, of course, if you depending on what kind of operations you are thinking about, we have it. You can always contact me at SwedenBIO. We do a lot of introductions and help internationals to get going in Sweden. So I think that's a good way to get started, to get to know Sweden.
Thank you for your time and good luck with the event.
Thank you so much.